so plain and precious. Finally, the Book of Mormon is the keystone of
Emmanuel.
Just as the arch crumbles if the keystone is removed, so does all the church fall with the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon. The enemies of the church understand this clearly.
Travis Wayne Goodsell. So the bishop in Mississippi, who resigned over the pulpit of conference the other weekend, Sunday, still is not revealing why he left. He is keeping it to himself and shocking the whole world of Mormonism. Mormons purposely don't want to know anything about it. They just assume that he stopped reading his scriptures, stopped praying to get the right feeling, didn't go to the temple, violated the word of wisdom. Maybe he had an affair or some other kind of sin that caused him to kick the pricks and leave the church. Whereas critics are all over this, thinking that therefore the church is now proven to be false because a bishop of rank who knows nothing of Scripture, who doesn't study Mormonism, is their now new poster boy for the church being false. You guys are both wrong. Learning of the Jews. That's all you have to factor in to your conclusion. And nobody does. That destroys this church, but yeah, it destroys you critics too, which is why neither of you will use it. And so you create Mormonism in your own image, just like the bishop did. And his image was something that he could not tolerate. And so he left. He could not love the church. And he left. But yeah, it's bad for Mormons too, because the image that Mormons create for themselves about the church is also wrong. I've been telling you that I've been now watching Star Trek, going through from the beginning with the movie First Contact into Star Trek Enterprise and then Star Trek Discovery, the first 2 seasons, as the others have to be placed in chronological order. And then now I'm in Strange New Worlds, Season 2. And Spock was engaged to a full Vulcan. Spock, in case you don't follow Star Trek, is a half and half. Half human, half Vulcan. And the script writers get it wrong about feelings versus logic. They have no clue about either. They make up their own version of it. Because the Vulcans obviously are passionate people, and their claims to suppress them is not working very well, as the arrogance and pride and judgmentalness just oozes all over the place. Those are feelings. But Spock's fiancée did not love him. It was her image of what a marriage relationship was to be. And Spock needed to conform and comply to it in order for her to love as a Vulcan would love. And was emotionally blackmailing Spock to give up his career with Starfleet, complaining constantly that their relationship was in jeopardy because his duties to Starfleet kept him away from her. But she too had a job that kept her away from him. That Beeman mote was not comprehended by her. And so there was an episode in which an accident in the shuttle resulted in an alien entity fixing Spock into a human, removing his Vulcan nature from him. And he's trying to deceive her parents, who come over for the ritualistic meeting of the parents of the fiancé for their approval, to show that he can be a good man for their daughter. And in the background, there's a haughty bleach blonde nurse from sickbay who has demonstrated she can kick butt when she and the doctor took on a whole ship of Klingons. It was awesome. I mean, yeah, they doped themselves up with adrenaline to do it, but still. And she was crushing on Spock. He came to her for advice about his fiancée, and she was helping him. She didn't emotionally blackmail him. He came to her, and she helped him. But she loved him. And so when this alien entity turned him full human, she knew that Spock needed to be restored to his half-human, half-Vulcan. And even though this human side was demonstrating emotions for her, she knew what was best for him to be himself, not something that she wanted him to conform and comply to her will, like his fiancée was doing to him. And so she sacrificed her life to get the alien entity to fix the problem. And in doing so, the fiancée called it off. She could not love Spock for who he is. Whereas Spock, through that whole process, logically concluded the haughty bleach blonde nurse is the one for him. And so that's where I left off. So obviously when he's with Captain Kirk, he's not with her. So something happens. But nonetheless, that concept of not forcing a preconceived bias on someone is important for relationships. And Mormons are told that there's a Jesus who loves them, who sacrificed his life for them. And so Mormons create Jesus in their own image in order to love him. Critics, however, because they learn that the prophets are lying to them for whatever the reason they leave, also believe that Jesus of Mormonism is a fraud. And there are some who go back to Christianity, but as we're finding out lately, People are giving up on religion altogether. But still, it's created in their image of how life should be. And so they are creating a non-Christ in their own image. They have no interest, neither Mormon or ex-Mormon have an interest in learning what the scriptures are actually talking about, who they're actually prophesying about. Because they're not talking about literal history. And so in section 1, verse 16, it's talking to Mormons in the future. And these Mormons in the future are not listening to their Christ, as Joseph Smith's second vision warns Mormons to do. Verse 40, Mormons need to know who their Christ is, who is coming, and hearken to him, or they're going to be cut off. Verse 14 in section 1. Same as in verse 40. There is a consistent pattern with Joseph Smith and his warnings to us in these latter days. And so Mormons, therefore, if Joseph Smith truly is a prophet, seer, revelator, and translator, would have to be correct that Mormons currently have strayed from the ordinances, that current Mormons have broken the everlasting covenant, that Mormons currently do not seek their Christ to establish his righteousness, but every Mormon walks in their own way after the image of their own Jesus. I can testify that this is true. Right, Mormons? Because you reveal it to me. And so again, even Babylon the Great, which shall fall, cut off, fall. You are not listening to the calamity which shall come upon the Mormons and the rest of the world. And so thus the need of Joseph Smith. You cannot have your own preconceived biases about who your Christ is. Because you're all wrong. You're not using the learning of the Jews. You are using another religion that you yourself have molded and fashioned into an idol god. So, thanks to Stanford, I'm able to use what I wanted to talk about that I just did to lead into his request that he left me 7 hours ago, plus 15 minutes. And so he goes through and quotes prophecies of the Christ from the Old Testament. And he says at the end, I'd be grateful to hear you address this sequence of prophecies. And so the first one is, he doesn't reference the, oh yeah, he does. There's just an extra space between that. It's Jacob's father's blessing to Judah in Genesis 49. And if you obviously are not following me, because the views for the Bishop video have tanked. YouTube has now shut it off, and I'm no longer getting my views again, so everything's tanking and nobody's listening to me. And it's sad, because Mormons and critics have no clue who I am, and they don't care to know who I am because they've already got their preconceived biases about the church and what their conclusions are. And so you're not listening to an expert on the matter. You refuse. You've got your own image of what I'm supposed to say and how I'm supposed to say it, and I don't, and so Exactly. And so this is a situation where I've tried to explain, this is a Jewish author who wrote this during the Roman period time. This is not a literal history. This is not from an older document of literal history. Jacob, who became Israel and had his sons from the 2 wives. None of that is literal history. None of that happened. I took the courses from Thomas Robinson, whose mastery of Greek is still available on Amazon with the CD-ROM that he had asked me to make. But I had graduated, so I was moving on to Utah to be abused by Mormons after deciphering Paleo-Hebrew, showing that Joseph Smith is actually a translator. Neither side wants to believe it. And he had gone over the hypotheses, not theories, they were just hypotheses, of how the origin of Israel came to be in Israel. And nobody bothered to develop those into theories to be tested. And none of the hypotheses are correct. They're all wrong. And yet, scholars in the field all pick and choose their preconceived biases and force everything to fit. They're wrong. All wrong. Jasmine had sent me a clip about Isaac Newton and his interpretation of dates from the Bible. And I responded by saying that if he had known astronomy and applied it to Revelation chapter 12 and 19, he wouldn't have screwed up Daniel as badly as he did. But nonetheless, it's the same thing with the scriptures. The Jewish authors took the prophecies that came from the Egyptian documents, from the tombs, from the papyri, all of the documents. They took out prophecies, and the Genesis author and the other authors combined them into a narrative that tricks people into thinking it's literal history and developing hypotheses that are stupid and coming up with wrong dates for when Adam and Eve existed, etc., etc., etc. The house of Israel did not exist, but obviously Israel did come into existence. But everybody gets the wrong facts with the incomplete assemblance of the evidence. And so this is not literal history. Stanford already knows this. He's demonstrated that he's applying the pattern of the Jewish authors, the learning of the Jews, with his study of the Book of Mormon and with the Bible. And so he knows why to select these to ask me about them. Nonetheless, Jacob is the usurper. And this is about the Jewish Christ of the future. Jacob was given the new name Israel because through him, instead of Esau, his brother, because he usurped the birthright and blessing of his brother, he now is going to have the Jewish Christ through his lineage. And the Genesis author has Joseph as that Christ figure. Again, not real. Because Joseph goes on to take over Egypt, but the author doesn't really want to give it to him, and so makes him second in command instead. But that's the whole point of the prophecy. And then the Jewish author hesitates to actually go through with the prophecies and makes changes to them. For example, Noah is also the Christ of the Jews of the future. And yet, after Cain slays Abel, Noah is not through Cain, as he should be according to the prophecy. Instead, the author has Adam and Eve have another son who they name Seth, which is the Egyptian deity from which the prophecy comes from. It's Set who murders Osiris, and then Isis conceives from Osiris the future Christ, who is to restore the kingdom, whose name is Horus. Horus is the Egyptian Christ. But the Jewish author just can't do that. And so he has Set be born through Adam and Eve to be the ancestor of Noah instead of Cain. And so then there's two Enochs as a result of that. But nonetheless, that's how you know how to translate the Bible correctly and fulfill Ezekiel 37, combining the stick of Judah with the stick of Joseph of Egypt to correct the stick of Judah. And Judah is phonetically the same as Utah. Judah is the betrayer of Joseph. 20 pieces of silver rather than 30 pieces of silver for Judah who betrayed the Christ. Seriously, you want me to say Judas who betrayed Jesus? There's a reason. None of it is literal history. Joseph isn't a prophecy of Jesus. Jesus and Joseph are a prophecy of the Jewish Christ who still has yet to come in the future. They reveal, as revelators, the dates of the latter days of when he's coming. There is no second coming of a failure in the Roman period. It was Christians who screwed that all up with Constantine. And so, yes, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints automatically isn't true and is not Joseph's. And yet that's apparently what that bishop in Mississippi was doing, was assuming that Joseph Smith and Brigham Young are one and the same, not bothering to study to find out the truth. As Carly, for example, she deleted my first comment, and so I then commented about her deleting my comment. That one still remained. She hasn't deleted that one. I'm trying to help you, Carly, because you're brand new to this. You need to make sure that your seed is being properly planted in good soil. And so she didn't delete that comment. And so it'd be nice if she were to find my channel and with an unbiased view try to learn from me, like James and Jasmine have been doing. But people are free to choose. I can't force you. It's blatantly obvious I can't force you. And you've chosen wrong. Except for those of you who are listening right now. You obviously are wanting to learn. But those who gave up on me are the ones I'm talking to. And so, he's using a lion to describe Judah, and so thus Leo the lion. And I told you, the quadranted meteor showers are falling from the tail of the dragon, as there are Leonids falling from the tail of Leo. And the 13th is the last day for those I saw this morning. On the 14th, they're gone. And on 9/11, likewise, on 9/9, there was a sign in the heavens of falling stars. And so on 9/11, we find out 3 weeks later that Nelson fell. And thus why he waited 3 weeks to tell us. Because of his utter humiliation from what I had talked about. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all if somebody fell again and they didn't want to bother to tell us until 3 weeks from now. But nonetheless, I still had fulfilled it with video that I did on that day, just as I did previously. And so that's what you need to be understanding here, is that this is a prophecy of the future. It's giving you a star date, and it has already happened. And so Jacob tells Judah, your brothers shall praise you. That's the Palm Sunday event. Not literal history. It didn't happen in the Roman period time. And so you need to understand this is when you get to Zion. His triumphal entry into Jerusalem is his triumphal entry into Zion, which is supposed to be this year. And so Mormons obviously are not praising him because they don't even know him. They are betraying him as Judah or Judas did. They are fulfilling the prophecy. And so the enemy war thing, that's in Revelation 19. That's what we're doing right now. There is a war going on, and Mormons are choosing to follow Lucifer. They have lost their second estate. They have betrayed their Christ because they don't know it. And so he's still the chosen one. He has the name of the Christ, not all these other names like Judah, Joseph, Jesus, Samson, Noah, Abraham, depending on which story you're using, whether he's the father or the son. It would be when a person is in the son position, not the father position. And so that's what it's referring to there, is Judah being the conqueror has to do with restoring Zion. Now understand, Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon make it very clear that if Mormons choose to be disobedient and not follow their Christ, that they will be utterly destroyed and there will be no Zion. The Book of Ether, how does that end again? The Book of Mormon, how does that end again? It's the restoration of the gospel, isn't it? Utter destruction, Mormons. Utter destructions. And critics, it's not enough to leave the church. You have to leave the land. There is destruction coming. And you too will be cut off for not listening to your Christ. You were Mormon. It applies to you too. And you're not even listening to know. Both Mormons and ex-Mormons are part of the prophecy considered Mormon. And thus, section 1 of Joseph Smith. And so the next one is Balaam. I can't do the guttural thing for that, so just understand why I said it that way. He too prophesies. He is told that he is supposed to curse Israel and can't, because the Spirit is telling him to bless Israel. And I'm surprised you didn't include the star as part of this prophecy. He does not put that in the Numbers 24 passage. But he does go over Judah the lion, similar to the Genesis one, which is what he's focusing on here. But yeah, the star sign is what you're supposed to be paying attention to for the revelation that was given by Jacob as to the date of when this was to occur. And so, yeah, again, talks about Judah as a lion and feeding on the carcass of his enemies, breaking their bones into pieces, bringing them out of Egypt, the Exodus pattern for the Jewish Christ, a man like Moses. And I notice that Stanford is using a different Bible than the King James Version of the Bible. And so, yeah, he cannot fulfill the prophecies independently. You cannot be the Christ when nobody believes in you, when everybody betrays you because you're not their version of their own created image of a Christ, and thus the utter destruction that awaits everybody until people repent and actually come unto the true Christ, prophesied in all Scripture. I had one lady ask me, "What do you intend to do as king?" Give up the kingdom, establish a constitutional republic. Not complicated. It's there in the Book of Mormon. Nephi did not want to be king, and yet they forced him to be king. Mosiah gave up the kingdom to establish a constitutional republic. It's in the Book of Mormon. Why would you think that I would go contrary to the Book of Mormon when it was Brigham Young who went contrary to the Book of Mormon? Nobody gets it. And so he then goes on to 2 Samuel, where Nathan prophesies to King David, which, if you take it literal history incorrectly, then yeah, you assume that David is the prophecy of the previous Genesis and Numbers passages. But he too is a man like Moses, as his full name is David Moses, of the 18th dynasty of Egypt. But he is not a literal history character. He was named that for that purpose, for the prophecies. And Nathan tells David, "Your house and your sovereignty will always stand secure before me, and your throne be established forever." Yeah, in Zion. But only if Mormons, including ex-Mormons, repent and seek their true Christ and hearken to him, so that they are not cut off, utterly destroyed. And then Israel will come back to Yahweh, your God. This is a Hosea prophecy. Your iniquity was your downfall. Provide yourselves with words and come back to Yahweh. Say to him, take away all iniquity so that we may have happiness again and offer your words of praise from our lips, not our blood sacrifices. Yep. You need to learn to love the Christ for who he is, not for who you demand him to be. He will not conform and comply to your will. He is who he is, and he will not change. He will sacrifice his life for you to save you, and you will betray him. Shall I put it in the past tense? Because it's already happened. Police Chief Caruth was also in the news. I think it was KUTV2 that was the only one to report it. They're going to replace him. He has been caught letting a drunk officer go without reprimand, without any kind of punishment. And because of this dereliction of duty as the chief of police for South Salt Lake, they are replacing him. And it's expected that there's a specific woman that will be replacing him. If those of you who have followed me when I was in the shelter, because the church locked me up in there, you would know that I know Caruth personally. I talked with him face to face, as one man speaketh to another. Because the shelter is purposely harming the homeless. They are allowing drugs to run rampant. And it was making every one of us sick from the drug residue. Not just the overdoses of the homeless who were dying in there. All so that Gail Miller and the corporate board could profit off of it. Because not a single donated penny to the homeless goes to the homeless. The only thing that goes to the homeless are actual materials. Because the corporate board, Gail Miller, can't turn a profit off of reselling them. That would not look good. And so the homeless do not get helped. And we're now in the blue code, or whatever they're now calling it, in which they're giving shelter to overflow to keep the homeless from freezing to death. Unfortunately, what you do not know about Code Blue, or whatever it's called, is that the shelter will not allow you as a homeless person to bring in your property. You have to be completely destitute in order to get a place in the shelter, even the overflow. And so if you have possessions, you don't get in. You have to give up your possessions. And you've heard the news where the city will go through and demolish the tent camps of the homeless, calling it a health violation to justify destroying the lives of the homeless, to keep them down. These tent city homeless are not allowed in the shelters. This is just an attempt to have the homeless conform and comply to their will. They cannot love the homeless for who they are and lift the homeless out of their poverty. They do not love the homeless, and so they don't care if the homeless do drugs in the shelter and kill themselves off and kill off other homeless at the same time. I have a tent city right under the overpass. They aren't in the shelter because they can't bring their property in. It's in the 20s this morning when I went running. There will be homeless who will die because our government, ordered by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, does not love. And so Caruth, just like he did with the officer who was drunk, let him go. Likewise, let the homeless do drugs in the shelter. They will not crack down on the shelter for creating a hostile environment, for creating an unhealthy, unsanitary, uninhabitable living conditions. The shelter needs to be condemned and destroyed and rebuilt, and it needs to be run properly next time, but they won't do it. They didn't even want to build new shelters after they tore down the road home downtown. That was their whole intention, was to do away with the homeless, to lock them up, treat them as criminals, and be done with them. Because the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was fed up with all the homeless panhandling around Temple Square. And so with this remodeling of the Salt Lake Temple and Temple Square, they're able to keep the homeless out for the majority of the part. But the church is planning on getting it all fixed, and they've got part of it completed. And so thus the homeless will come back again unless the church can do a final solution and exterminate the homeless. Just like the Jews during World War II Nazi Germany. Just like Islam is doing to Israel right now. And so, yeah, Caruth has that pattern of practice. It was expected that he would eventually cross this line and he would lose his job for it because he failed to do his job and crack down on the crime. Not of the homeless and the civilians, but of those in positions of power and of trust. He let them get away with it. So now, with a new person, she's going to be expected to do her job and not let things get by. And so once the transfer of power is completed, pay attention to the news from South Salt Lake City. It's going to be fun, or it should be. If it's not, she's going to lose her job too. And so yes, expect her to crack down. Expect a lot more drug busts. Expect the shelter to get busted if she's going to do her job. This is part of the Purim of the Jews concept that's also in Deuteronomy 19. Because he failed to protect me. He even purposely hurt me. And now he's getting his comeuppance. What he did to me is now turning on him, and he's getting punished for it. So, are you sure you want to mess with me? Are you sure you want to not believe me and send me hate comments and death threats when you should know that there is the prophecies of your utter destruction? Are you sure you want to play Judas with me? So, I have now addressed the sequence of prophecies for you.